Jack did his very best to pretend to be asleep as the winged figure moved between his bed and that of his brother Dylan. Tom Duffy, thank you for being here. We're going to write a horror story about a tooth fairy. I know that's been done before, but we'll see if mine is the best tooth fairy horror story ever written. Jack did his best to pretend to be asleep as the winged figure moved between his bed and that of his brother. He wanted to believe this was their father or mother wearing some kind of costume. But the proportions were all wrong. Spell this correctly. The proportions were all wrong. And his parents were not practical jokers. This eliminated any question that the tooth fairy excuse me, that the tooth fairy wasn't real. Jack wished Dylan had never talked him in to staying up to catch her in the act. You are a card, Armand. Did you get your nap in today, or are you giving up on sleep again to support me here? I'm really concerned. I feel like my timing here kind of just throws off your whole day. Let me know how your sleep's going. Jack wished Dylan had never talked him into staying up to catch her. As Jack dared to peek through his slitted eyelids, he saw his brother's eyes were wide open with fear. Dylan needed to start acting if he didn't want to be discovered by this creature. Alright, Armand says, no nap today. I actually left the house with the wife to buy Terry Bradshaw bourbon, Duncan, little free libraries, and now writing with you until spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. A full day. That's a lot of activity for a young man your age. Alright. Dylan needed to start acting if he didn't want to be discovered by this creature. The fear in his brother's eyes unsettled Jack. Dylan was only 8, but he was a full 13 months older than Jack. So he was supposed to be the brave one. Tom says, and there are celebrities left who don't have their own liquor. Yeah. It's always strange ones too. It's not. I don't know who the celebrities would be that you would expect to have their own liquors. I don't know who that is. Like what the combination of folks would be. I guess like old school Hollywood actors, maybe. Maybe Tommy Lee Jones. Like if I found out he had a liquor, I would be like, well, of course he does. But just every name that gets thrown out for who has their own liquor or who has their own coffee, it's just like, did they just draw that name out of a hat? Who is it? They all have one. It is getting ridiculous, or they have their own coffee. Lemmy should have had his own whiskey, of course. But then, it's like, well, then, Kiss has everything out, and you're like, well, okay, I guess. But then you're like, so Skid Row has something, and you're like, wait, what? Is that... Who let them do that? That kind of thing. And nothing against Terry Bradshaw, but like if you were literally just picking a name out of a hat, I would be like, oh, okay, so that was a randomly picked name. Lemmy has several whiskeys. There you go. So I don't know. It just always throws me who. So he has his own tequila. Oh, he has his own whiskey. Oh, here's another random band that decided to start selling coffee. That kind of thing. Jay Wilburn single malt scotch. That would be pretty random. And they'd be like, is it good? And I'd be like, I don't know. I don't drink. I would buy that. Of course you would, Armand. If you buy Terry Bradshaw stuff, you should be buying mine. And Skid Row coffee. Is it Skid Row liquor or is it Skid Row coffee? I can't remember. Which, by the way, is a terrible name for either coffee. Maybe not. Maybe a cheap wine would be good for Skid Row. All right. No offense to Skid Row. I'm just saying. Skid Row coffee, slave to the grind. Good Lord. When that was pitched to them, they're like, yes, this is meant to be all along. Order D. Snyder coffee, too. He's another random one, but again, doesn't surprise me because, of course, he's marketing everything. I think he didn't make as much money from the songs as other folks did, and so he's getting paid anywhere he can, and I do not blame him. Dylan was only 8, but he was a full 13 months older than Jack, so he was supposed to be the brave one. Jack kept his breathing slow and steady. He made sure to make a little noise with his nose. That always convinced his parents he was asleep. He watched as the figure of the Tooth Fairy knelt beside his bed. She had a smell to her. He'd expect it to be perfume or candy. It was earthy and green, sort of like mowed grass, but more boggy. All right, there was something odd about her eyes. It was dark, but the low cast glow of the nightlight beyond the end of the bed caught her eyes. Frank Edler Watermelon Hard Seltzer. There you go. Not girly enough for Frank. But would you buy it, Armand? I gotta imagine you would. I mean, the way you leaned into pumpkin beer that one time, I just have to imagine that even if you were just doing it, even if you were pretending to just do it to support Frank, I think you would still buy it out of curiosity. It was dark, but the low-cast glow of the nightlight beyond the end of the bed caught her eyes. Caught her strange eyes. They were faceted, like a jewel. Later, Jack would think, later, after it was too late, it's foreshadowing there, Jack would think they were compounded eyes like those of an insect, but in this humanoid creature's face. She licked her lips. Her tongue was very long and looked to be candy pink as far as Jack could tell. But it wasn't forked. It wasn't forked like a serpent's tongue. Even though it made a serpentine slurp. She's going to eat me, Jack thought. It took everything in him to continue to fake sleep breathing. All right. Her arms were thick and hairy, like those of a man. He wanted again to believe that this was his father having fun. But even Dad's arms weren't that hairy. Her armpits were hairy too. And that boggy, green, sweaty smell got heavier as the thick hand slid under Jack's pillow. His head lifted and bobbled on top of the pillow with the Tooth Fairy's arm underneath. This made 0 sense. Even if this really was her. How could any kid stay asleep if this is how she extracted loose teeth? Jack just wanted it all to be over. The arm came back out, dropping his head back down. Jack paused in his breathing, but then resumed. She held the small tooth high up in the air to catch the light where she still knelt. All right. The tooth had a deep hole in the bottom. A spot of brown dried blood. A spot of brown dried blood remained there. Jack remembered, even though the light wasn't bright enough for him to see it now. She seemed satisfied with the offering and dropped the tooth into a sparkling pink bag over her shoulder. She fished about in a pouch. She fished about in a pouch on her belt to the jingle of coins. Jack usually got dollars for his teeth now. She seemed satisfied with the offering and dropped the tooth into a sparkling pink bag over her shoulder. She fished about in a pouch on her belt to the jingle of coins. Jack usually got $1 for his teeth now, but he wasn't about to start complaining. All right. It occurred to him for the first time that the person in this strange costume with the thick, hairy arms and hairy pits might be some stranger, some strange man sneaking into their room. How would a stranger notice? How would a stranger know about a missing tooth? His parents were on Facebook, but Dad mostly just argued politics, and Mom, I need to capitalize that because we're using Dad in place of his name. Dad mostly argued politics, and Mom just shared her daily Wordle scores and invited people to play Candy Crush so she could get more lives. Besides, this hairy tooth fairy had big boobs under her striped dress. The fairy breathed out in Jack's face. The fairy breathed out in Jack's face as she lifted a coin from the pouch. The breath was hot and smelled of a pond on a summer night. She slid the coin under his pillow, and Jack held his breath. Fortunately, she did not root as deep this time. Then she stood back to her full height, towering over Jack's bed, hulking over him. He was consumed in her massive shadow. Jack decided to pull another of his tricks. He caught his breath in mid-inhale, gave a little choking sound, smacked his lips on some spit, took one deep breath, and returned to the long, slow breathing of pretend sleep. I'll get Jay to tell a fun fact. Hold on just a moment. All right. Pretend sleep. It seemed to work. She slowly make pretend sleep. Yeah, it seemed to work. She slowly turned away, and her wings started to flutter in a buzz that was more fly or bee rather than butterfly. All right. Armand Rosamelia redeemed 1,000 channel points to get a fun fact. Since we're doing a Tooth Fairy story, we'll talk about that. My parents played all that stuff, the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, and all that with us while we were kids. With our boys, we had decided to not explicitly tell them that Santa Claus was real or any of that kind of stuff. We didn't want to confuse them with, okay, well, we were lying to you about this, but we're telling you the truth about this other stuff we think or believe in and that kind of stuff. So we split it up into a game where my wife played along like she thought it might all be real, even though she never specifically said it was. And I always played the skeptic. So whenever we were putting out stockings or putting out cookies or putting away teeth for the Tooth Fairy or any of that kind of stuff, I would always say, like, guys, I don't know about this. This seems a little far-fetched. This, like, whole flying reindeer thing and going all around the whole world at night. I just don't see how the math works out on that. So I kind of said all that kind of stuff without ever actually saying that, like, 100% it isn't true or any of that kind of stuff. So when the boys finally figured out that stuff wasn't real, I'd spent their whole lives telling them that it seemed a little far-fetched to me. So they didn't like hold it against me that we had made up a story. And actually we had told Daniel, my oldest, definitively that Santa Claus wasn't real, because he was very young. He couldn't have been but maybe 4 or 5 at that point. And he had been reading hearing the history. It was on a cartoon or something. Hearing the history of Santa Claus, and when like the Saint Nicholas legend started and all that, and so it was thousands of years. And he started asking, like, how could he be thousands of years old? And then of course I was playing skeptic. I don't know anybody that's that old. And then he was, he heard all the stories about Santa Claus, and he's like, if Santa Claus is real, why won't God let him die and go to heaven? And so like at that point I told my wife, I'm like, we just got to tell him, like, we can't like have him like having this existential crisis over Santa Claus. So I sat him down and I just explained, this is just a game that parents play with their kids, and it's not, Santa Claus isn't real. And I said, and you're hearing this very young, so when you go to school, make sure to not tell the other kids, because their parents may still be playing the game with them or whatever. And then when his brother came along, we said, okay, you can play the game with us, with Henry. And we explained the rules of, like, you don't definitively tell him that Santa Claus is real and all that kind of stuff. But at that moment when we were sitting down and I explained to him that Santa Claus wasn't real, he sat and thought for a second, and then he's like, you mean the elves are all up there at the North Pole all by themselves? So, of course, then I had to explain that the elves weren't real. None of it was real. Tooth Fairy wasn't real. Easter Bunny wasn't real. But, of course, we had already kind of been playing that this was just a game we played and all that kind of thing. Hey, good afternoon, My Writing. Thank you for being here. If anybody's looking for a stream to follow, check out My Writing. He is on there regularly, and I've checked him out the last 2 days. They are all real awful parents, and there you go. Oh, I probably should have put a spoiler warning out there before I explained all that story. But anyway, that was the saga of letting my sons know that the Tooth Fairy and all that wasn't real. The younger boy never really bought into it, and I think it may have been, that his brother already knew and other people already knew. So he like confronted us and said, "They're not real, right?" And so of course we told him they weren't. He very young, but we said, "Okay, but again, do not tell the other kids at school because their parents may still be playing the game. So every time someone comes up and starts talking to him about Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, he kind of sits there and looks around, because sometimes it's like an older kid or sometimes it's like somebody's parent. So he just kind of looks at us like, does this woman really not know that Santa Claus isn't real? And then we're like, she knows they're not real. She knows. All right, let me catch up on chat here. Again, thanks for stopping into the stream while I was writing earlier. It means a lot. Oh, no problem. I had a lot of fun. That story was worth at least twice the points. There you go. Hey, Twitch won't let me follow you. Want to check out your feed? Armand has trouble with the follow button, so give him an opportunity. He'll jump on there. Yeah, my writing does a good feed, Armand. He takes a writing prompt of some kind. He'll pull them from different places and then write out the whole story. Today was over 5,000 words, and it was a serial killer story. Really, really good. Yesterday's was really good, too. I kind of come on to Twitch, especially on a day when I am going to be streaming eventually. I come on and set up everything so that I have my OBS software ready and make sure the slides are ready. Make sure I have my dashboard up and all that. But even on days when I'm not streaming, I'll pull up Twitch and just find some, look through the people I'm following and find somebody who's writing, or I'll look up the writing tag if no one else is on, and then I'll just follow a new person and follow their stream, and just have it on in the background as I'm doing other things. And sometimes I'll do that so I don't forget to follow somebody. Like Armand is on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday consistently at 1. And he's done interviews too. Armand will be on in the evening and do an interview. He had one just recently. I guess it's more of like a podcast where you and JC talk about movies and stuff. And then he and his wife were on at one point too for a bonus round. But sometimes I'll go ahead and get Twitch on and up so that I don't forget to watch Armand at 1, because I'll get caught up in things and then look up and it's almost time for me to stream and he's over and all that. So usually I'll go ahead and get Twitch up so I don't miss somebody that's coming up, and I'll just see who's writing. And the last few days, my writing has been up there. And I don't know, it's something about your name or something about just the bright blue you have for your symbol or something like that that just stands out at me. So I catch it each time that you've been on when I happen to come on to get to work. All right. Okay, I think I followed you. Very good. Armand is both very good at technology. Like once he catches on to something, he does it well, and very and technology gives him headaches at the same time. So he's a little bit of both worlds. I think he straddles the world of analog and digital. It's a lot of fun, and I enjoy helping Armand figure out how computers work sometimes. Tom says, I was just able to follow. I think mobile Twitch works better than PC Twitch. I tend to use the PC version a lot, just simply because I got my whole setup here and I'm usually sitting at the computer anyway. I have some of my own ideas, but writing prompts have helped to get back into the swing of things. Yeah, nothing wrong with using them, and especially if you take an idea and take it a new direction. I like what you did with the serial killer one, and I have some brain issues, so I'm having trouble remembering, but the one before that, what did I watch yesterday? I can't remember yesterday's prompt, but it was really good. It was greatly appreciated as a small content creator and just a normal person who is writing. It means so much that someone like you takes the time. Oh, no problem at all. And Armand will agree with me. He's on here. He's always following new writer streamers and stuff, and we get ideas from each other and support each other on here, and the more of us that are on here, the better it is for everybody. The one before today, the assassin, that's right. It had a great opening line. And that's kind of in line with some of the stuff Armand writes. Armand, you may want to go check out the his stream from the day before yesterday. I assume, I don't know if my writing, you have your VODs set up where they save, but the one from the day before yesterday was really good. I like the opening line. Today's was good too. Sat and wrote it all the way through there. All right, but back to the Tooth Fairy. Started to buzz. There we go. Okay. That insectile motion made Jack feel like he was trapped in his room with some sort of alien or monster who might be capable of anything. Alright, I have to set up to save, and I have it set up to save, and I made a YT channel too so that I can save them there. The YouTube channel, yeah. I do that too. I tend to edit mine down, and I use them on YouTube, and then I also use them on Patreon. Twitch doesn't save things very long, not for newbies anyway. No, I think you only get 14 days. If you have your Prime account, if you have Amazon Prime, if you connect that to your Twitch account, then you automatically get the full 60 days. So even though I put mine over on YouTube, before I was affiliate, I still got the full 60 days because my Prime account was connected there. So if you just happen to have it, you can connect that over pretty easily. It gives you some other perks too, especially if you're into gaming. I don't do much of that, so I don't reap those benefits. And then also, if you have your Prime account connected over, you can follow someone with Prime, but then you can also join in on people when they're doing movie watch parties and stuff like that. Once we get past this month, I usually do one about once a week. Just some kind of movie that I want to watch, and sometimes I'll get some work done while I'm watching the movie instead of writing on stream and that kind of thing. But recently I've been doing that with my Prime account. Not as many people watch the watch parties as other types of streams, but I still enjoy doing them. I enjoy watching other people's watch parties too. All right. He could see his brother's eyes again, still wide open. The Tooth Fairy lifted off and bumped their ceiling fan. Fat bunnies of dust drifted down to the carpet from where they had been disturbed upon the blades. I try to get details like this when I'm writing a story. There's nothing real special about them, but the idea that the Tooth Fairy would fly up, if by having her bump the ceiling fan, it kind of makes it tactile and real, having dust fall down from the ceiling fan. But then also using a word like blade, even though you're talking about the blade of a fan as opposed to a weapon of some kind. And the word itself implies some sort of threat. It insinuates a threat of some kind. So the idea of having them disturbed upon the blade, the word disturb, the word blade, have sort of sinister connotations. And so without really having to reveal the threat completely yet, you kind of imply it in there, and those little tricks sometimes will help set the mood indirectly in a way that enhances the story. And a lot of times readers don't realize that's the reason that their fear and uneasiness is kind of stoked when you're doing a horror story. All right, so the Tooth Fairy lifted off and bumped their ceiling fan. Fat bunnies of dust drifted down to the carpet from where they had been disturbed upon the blades. She crossed the room in a bobbing motion through the air. Let's say when she opened the door. When she opened the door, she made no clear effort to stay quiet. I'm going to make this a new paragraph because I'm describing stuff from the hallway here. More light from outside the room revealed more details of her than Jack cared to see. She had a lot of bulk stretching the insides of her candy striped dress. The wings splashed with an oily rainbow in the new light as they blurred through their motion. Her face and neck had several folds of flesh, and her jeweled eyes seemed to bulge and be sunken into that extra flesh, extra skin at the same time. Her hair was long and pink. But looked unbrushed, uncombed, and brittle. Say Jack was just happy that she was leaving. From the hall, the sawing, let's say the deep sawing noise of Dad's snoring carried through the open door. Every so often, the fairy would bump the wall with a thump of her mass, of her great mass, and a sizzling buzz from her wings vibrating on the wall. Those noises retreated down the stairs. Leaving only the old familiar snoring. Dylan sat bolt upright in bed and whispered, "What the hell was that?" Jack didn't use bad words like Dylan did. And Dylan usually didn't use them in front of Jack or in the house. The question seemed appropriate to Jack tonight, though. "This was your idea," he said, without moving from under his covers or from his what'd you call it? The pillow, from his displaced pillow. I don't think that's the right word, but that's what I'm going to use for now. He wanted to pull the covers over his head, but he could still smell her boggy odor and feared it might be on his pillow, on his pillowcase, and then trapped under the covers with him. Never mind that. Never mind that, Jack. Do you think Mom and Dad know that she comes, say that thing, that it's gonna be two that's though, that thing comes into our house every time we lose a tooth? Jack didn't like to think about that at all. Jack didn't like to think about that at all. His parents consenting to this situation seemed off, to say the least. I hope not. Where do they think the money comes from? Where do they think the money comes from if they aren't the ones putting it there? Jack tried to swallow a couple times, but his throat was too dry. He wasn't about to walk down the hall to the bathroom sink, though. He hadn't decided yet if he might just wet the bed if he needed to go tonight. I don't know. He finally answered. Just be quiet until she's gone. Dylan pulled cord on his clown lamp next to his bed. The low wattage light was like the sun in Jack's eyes. Those two happy clowns around the curve of the plastic, I'll say hard plastic, shade of that lamp scared Jack. But tonight he had fears that made the lamp clowns, less than an afterthought. Turn that off. Are you crazy? What will she do if she finds out we were awake and saw her? Hold on, I'm going to turn off my heater here. Got down in the 20s here today. I live on coastal South Carolina. It usually doesn't get that cold this time of year. But we had a good cold snap, so I had to turn on my heater to warm up my office a little. All right, turn that off. Are you crazy? What will she do if she finds out we were awake and saw her? Dylan didn't answer at first, but then he asked, "Show me the coin she put." No. Show me what she put under your pillow. Dylan. The front door to the house opened with a crackle and then slammed closed. Dad paused, but then returned to a sloppy, uneven snoring. See? Some dust on my keyboard. See, we're good. She's gone. Jack shook his head. Ruffling his pillow. She can see the light outside. She can see the light from outside. She'll know. under your pillow first. Show me what's under your pillow first. Jack sat up and wrapped his blankets tight around him. He didn't want to be up anymore, but he didn't want to think about the Tooth Fairy's hands under his pillow. You get it. I don't want to touch it. Don't be a baby. Dylan was back to his old attitude, despite what had just visited them. He crossed between the beds and lifted, and flipped up Jack's pillow. From the warm side to the cold. Alright, I don't think she's gone. Nail biter. Be a weird story if that was it, wouldn't it? Alright, we'll find out together. Jack shuffled down toward the foot of the bed. The light from the clown lamp revealed it was a coin. It didn't look like a quarter, though. Dylan bent down for a closer look. Before he touched it. What is it? Jack asked. It's a coin. Dylan lifted it up between his fingers. It's a coin. Dylan lifted up between his fingers in the light. A little too much like a fairy inspecting Jack's tooth. For his liking. It was golden colored and thick. What country is it from? Dylan shrugged. Hell if I know. It looks like pirate gold. Pirate gold. Jack was tempted to take it. It was his tooth and his coin. Pirate gold. Jack was tempted to take it. It was his tooth and his coin. But he still didn't want to touch it. Yeah. There's a skull on one side, like a pirate flag. But the skull has horns, like a bull, and fangs, like don't say it, Dylan. Okay. Things like a you know what. The other side is a bunch of bones. Shaped like dog bones, with the hearts on the ends. Jack didn't understand that description. He let it go, though. Is there writing or numbers? Dylan didn't answer at first, as he turned toward the light and held it closer to his face. Some kind, I guess, but it's not American. Words look like they're spelled using teeth. Using teeth? How? Outside, a door slammed. It was too loud and hollow to be just a car. It sounded more like a door on a larger vehicle. Like a service truck. But not the rolling doors on the back. But not the rolling doors, but not like the rolling doors on the back sounded. 2 house doors slammed next. One was was near them. The other sounded like it was further down the street. Then a third house door slammed shut across the street. Dylan and Jack met eyes. Dylan and Jack met eyes. Jack shook his head and cowered into his blankets. Dylan set the coin on his side table under the direct light with a sturdy click. He then moved to the window. Dylan, don't. Shut up. I want to see. Jack shed his blankets and reached for the light, averting his eyes from the coin under it. It took him 2 tries, but he got the light off. What are you doing? What are you doing, Jack? Turn that back. Never mind. I can see better without it. Holy crap. Jack hated to do it, but he found himself padding across their room in bare feet to stand at his older brother's side in the window. Jack felt, but didn't really register the dust bunnies from the fan twining into his toes. Outside was a truck. It was like an ice cream truck. But double-deckered. Like a bus from England. It almost seemed too tall to pass under the power lines. there it was in the center of their neighborhood street, just a couple doors shy of their driveway. The sides were painted in splotches of pink and orange. Darker accents looked to Jack like splashed blood on the sides. The engine was running, and the vehicle shuddered from side to side every few seconds. Some shape, some dark shape, was behind the wheel. All through the yard, all through the yards and street, winged fairies, winged creatures. Passed back and forth between houses and the vehicle. Dylan shook his head. What is that? The Tooth Fairy bus? What are they doing here? Everyone can't have lost teeth today. Can they, Dylan? Dylan shrugged. Hold on. The story's going a little bit of a different direction than I expected. Dylan shrugged. I don't know. Not all those houses have children in them. A cluster of tooth fairies, all wearing different colors. All with different hair. All large with extra folds of skin. Gathered in the street, bathed in the light, in the headlights of the vehicle. Alright, that's one of the fun parts when the story takes off on its own. There you go. I kind of had a different plan for this, with the kids staying up. But as I'm getting into it, it makes less sense that they would make the choice that would get me down that particular path. And so we'll do however this story goes then. All right. They were sharing something, looking between them, passing things around. What do they got? Jack asked. Okay. He glanced over at the dark table, knowing that the coin was there. Not a quarter. Not American money. Not anything like what they had. Not a quarter, not American money, not anything like what they had been given for past teeth. Tonight was different. Teeth, Dylan said. What? Jack turned his attention out and down to the Tooth Fairy meeting in the street. They're looking at teeth. One of the fairies held up something too large to be a tooth. It was curved and pink. What's that? Dylan swallowed loud enough for Jack to hear beside him. Looks like someone's false teeth. I hope they're false teeth. Jack shook his head. What else could they be? They look a little bloody from up here. Dad continued to saw logs. No, that's too specific. Dad continued to snore behind them as the screaming started out there. A few lights went on. Down the street. Dad continued to snore behind them as the screaming started out there. A few lights went on down the street. The cries came from inside some of the houses. One voice was an adult woman. Another from a closer house was not. fairies seemed unfazed by this as they separated. A few of them flew into an opening on top of the tall vehicle. Others moved to houses farther down. Opening and closing doors loudly with no stealth. What are they? Is that Dylan? Is that real? A fairy flew out of the open door to a house with one of the screamers. Jack swore the fairy had a severed head held by the hair. The fairy hovered over the vehicle, over the opening in the vehicle's roof. The creature made a fist and punched the mouth of the head over and over. Teeth fell like rain until the fairy cast the head away into the bushes across the street. Dylan, did you see? Just be quiet. I saw it. Just be quiet. Glass shattered out there somewhere. Two more fairies flew. Two more fairies flew through the open door, and the screaming stopped. A moment later, they flew back out with handfuls of teeth. Across the street, all the lights went on. And the door flung open. Jack started. I know who it is. A fairy with green hair carried out Kathy's limp body, wearing a pair of flannel pajamas. Kathy was in middle school. Jack couldn't remember if she lost all her teeth yet or not. Her mouth didn't look good as they passed under the street light. Okay, let me fix that. That's not what I meant to do. All right. Kathy's parents ran out after the kidnapping fairy. Her dad had a baseball bat. Kathy's mom held a phone to her ear and cried out in a garble of syllables that didn't sound like words. Jack said, "We need to call the cops." Jack said, "We need to call the cops." I think she already is. Kathy's dad caught up with the green-haired creature. It ducked the swing of the bat, causing the man to stagger in his driveway from the near miss, and lose one of his slippers. The fairy laid Kathy down. The fairy laid Kathy down on the at the corner of her driveway, like she was part of the trash pickup. Her father came in for another swing. But the fairy caught the bat with one hand and lifted the man by his throat with the other. Her father came in for another swing, but the fairy caught the bat with one hand and lifted the man by his throat with the other. Kathy's father showed no fear as he struggled in the air. They flew back into the bushes before the fairy dropped him out of sight onto his back and went to work with the bat. Kathy's mom screamed louder. The fairy with purple hair flew up out of the vehicle and dove toward their porch. The mom dropped her phone and ran inside. She tried to close the door, but the purple-haired fairy forced her way in, and they disappeared inside. The brothers went on watching as their father continued to snore. The fairies finally all flew out and entered the top of the vehicle like bees returning to a hive. Hey Jay, how's it going? Going great, Joe. Thank you for dropping in. Writing a scary, gross tooth fairy story here. The fairies finally all flew and entered the top of the vehicle like bees returning to a hive. The vehicle rolled slowly forward, past the boy's house. There was a light tinkle of off-tune music that marked the tall truck leaving the neighborhood. Extra no in neighborhood, I think. Alright. Doors were all closed again. Kathy still lay at the end of her driveway. Teeth are already pretty scary. There you go, Joe. No argument there. The doors were all closed again. Kathy still lay at the end of her driveway. She was not the only body left out in the night like trash. Dylan. Both boys sucked in air as the pink-haired fairy flew up into their view. Alright, I think you're on the CUSPID of something great, the cusp of something great. There you go. Alright, both. I do feel like this may end up being something. We'll see, especially after a few edits, but it's pretty dark. Very different from what I thought I was going to be writing. Both boys sucked in air as the pink-haired fairy flew up into their view, inches from the outside of the second story window. That's when Jack recognized... I wrote a page of something today, longhand. Good job, man. That's when Jack recognized her eyes as those of an insect. He wanted to stagger backward, away from her and the window, but his knees locked up on him as a small dribble of urine ran down one pajama pant leg. Dylan, despite being older, grabbed tight to his brother, further holding him in place. The Tooth Fairy, Jack's Tooth Fairy, slowly lifted one fat, hairy finger to her pale lips, and even through the glass they could hear the long, drawn out hiss of her. There we go. She paused, maybe long enough for them to, maybe long enough to confirm they understood. And then she looped away through the air with more cartoon fairy grace than her bulk seemed to imply was possible. Jack tried a few times to speak, but failed. His brother finally released him, to lean against the window frame. Against the window frame to hold himself up. Jack tried a few times to speak but failed. His brother finally released him to lean against the window frame to hold himself up. Jack wavered on his feet and got the first deep breath he could pull since Dylan started squeezing him. Now he found his voice. What do we do? We keep our mouths shut like she told us, Jack. Are you crazy? Jack wanted to remind Dylan that staying up to catch the Tooth Fairy had been his idea, but that point seemed small at the moment. People will know. Look what they did. People will know. It doesn't have anything to do with us, Dylan said. She told us to be quiet. That doesn't have anything to do with us, Dylan said. She told us to be quiet and that she'll leave us alone. Good Lord, I'm having trouble today. I didn't hear her say any of that. That's the message I got. From her shush, Jack. Why would she leave us alone? After we faked sleeping. After we saw what they did. Why wouldn't they come back to finish us off? Dylan shook his head, but said, maybe she accepted your tooth as an offering. Maybe that bought us all our lives. Jack shook his head back. That makes no sense. We've lost teeth before. Alright, Jack said, that makes no sense. We've lost teeth before. Other kids, too. no one ever... Hold on, I think I have an extra line here. Jack shook his head back. That makes no sense. We've lost teeth before, other kids too. No one ever had a neighborhood killing spree. After. I have these kids talking a little higher than their age, so I may need to adjust it a little, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. It makes no sense. Keep your voice down, Jack. You'll wake up Dad. Jack raised his voice to a shout. He just slept through a bunch of murder fairies. If that didn't wake him up, thunder carried through the night. Then another clap. Then a third, followed by a fourth. The whole house vibrated. These were giant footsteps. And the boys looked through the window again to see a skeleton walking down the center of the street, standing taller than the houses, taller than the highest trees beyond the yards. The bony creature with horns and fangs out of its exposed, with horns and fangs protruding out of its exposed skull. Reached down and lifted one of the bodies from the end. Okay, hold on. I had an S here. We're getting close to the home stretch here. Thank you, Houston Ryder, for the follow. Appreciate it. Reached down and lifted one of the bodies from the end of a driveway at the far end of the street. Boys both stared in silence. Jack didn't know what his brother thought of this new manifestation, but he expected to see the new monster, the new bone monster, eat. Instead, it cast the body over its shoulder into a large brown sack. Okay, I'm going to make that a new paragraph because we're going to be talking about it picking up bodies for a while here. Cast the body over its shoulder into a large brown sack. The monster crossed the street and collected a woman in a housecoat that Jack couldn't see before. Her leg was twisted badly, but she was alive and screamed as the giant hand dropped her into the sack too. It sagged with the weight of the two bodies inside and swung back and forth just over the street. The skeletal monster added a third body to its growing collection. And then ducked under a power line. Poles on both sides shook, and a cascade of sparks rained down on someone's yard. The nightlight behind the brothers flickered, but then went steady again. Dylan, what do we do? Jack asked. Dylan, what do we do? Jack asked as the creature collected bodies from one of the yards. We stay quiet and do nothing. Jack leaned forward and looked across the street. Kathy's out there. Forget her, Jack. She's dead. Her whole family's dead. We're still alive. We need to get away from the window. She's still breathing. I can see that from here. The ground thundered with the bone monster's steps. Just get away from the window. Dylan moved toward his bed and pulled at the shoulder. Hey there, thanks for dropping in. I'm writing a story about a scary tooth fairy. Thank you for the follow, too. I appreciate that so very much. Just get away from the window. Dylan moved toward his bed and pulled at the shoulder of Jack's pajama top. It was an old one that was getting too small. And showed Jack's skinny belly. Do you have a moment or 5 to look at writing sample of mine, 600 words? Not right now, buddy. I got a lot going on, so I'm sure I'd love to see it at some point, but now's not a great time for me. It was an old one that was getting too small and showed Jack's belly. Oh, you're welcome. It was an old one that was getting too small and showed Jack's belly. Skinny belly. The image was fading and the material was pearled all over. The image was fading and the material was pearled all over. Still, one of Jack's favorite superheroes was emblazoned across his chest. He did move away from the window, but he ran down the stairs. And he ran, let's say, out the door. I need to be more specific. Out the door and down the stairs. Jack. 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 Dylan yelled from the bedroom, but did not follow. The snoring continued as if nothing were amiss. Jack fought with the locks on the doors, on the front door, with his older brother still yelling from upstairs. Okay. Jack fought with the locks on the front door with his older brother still yelling from upstairs. Then he realized it was already unlocked. From when the Tooth Fairy left. He flung it open and ran out into the night against her orders to stay quiet and presumably to stay out of it. He crossed over the grass toward the street. Instead of sticking to the concrete path. The grass was already damp with dew, and he stepped on something sharp, maybe a gumball, maybe a prickly. I need to be specific there because I'm not sure everybody's familiar with sweet gum trees. Maybe a prickly gumball from one of the sweet gum trees in the front yard. Jack hissed and hobbled, but continued running. His bare feet slapped against the asphalt. His bare feet slapped against the asphalt, and as he crossed to where Kathy lay at the end of her drive, more glass shattered in the direction of the monster. More glass shattered in the direction of the monster. Something crunched. It sounded like metal. Maybe a car. Jack shook Kathy by her shoulders and whispered into her face, "Wake up. Wake up, Kathy. We have to go. It's dangerous. Please wake up and come with me right now." Her mouth was a bloody mess. Pink bubbles rose from her split lips and burst each time she exhaled a sour breath. All right. Jack turned his face away. and saw what was left of her father. He shut his eyes tight and breathed through his mouth, waiting for the sick shock to pass. The ground boomed again, and Jack looked up the street to see the bony Goliath grabbing up the discarded bodies of his neighbors from their driveways. The sack behind his back was getting heavy. Let me put its here so it's clear we're talking about the monster. Behind its back was getting heavy. Jack watched Mr. Let me come up with a name. Mr. Felser fall in next. Felser was a policeman. How could the monster how could the monster be able to do something like that to the police? Jack circled around and got his hands under Kathy's arms. He tried to heave her up, but her awkward dead weight was too much for him. He just managed to get get his lap under her head before he dropped her again. Kathy, please wake up, or we're both gonna die. He didn't know that for a fact. There was no telling where that giant skeleton might take them. No telling what he might do that would make dying a better choice. He seemed to be connected to those violent tooth fairies. Maybe he was their master. Maybe their god. teeth might be offerings to him. The fairies could take the teeth, but something that big might want the rest of the bones. The bone god drew closer, collecting every body left in the neighborhood, left out in the neighborhood. Jack took in a breath to beg Kathy back into consciousness, but the words died inside him as he glanced the other way and saw the pink-haired fairy floating above the street, not far away. She had her hairy arms crossed, and in the stark glow of the streetlights, he could see that all that hair was pink. Jack showed his teeth, including the gap for the one he just lost. Jack showed his teeth without realizing it, including the gap for the one he just lost that she took in exchange for a coin and the lives of everyone else on the street. You found his voice again. You're not the boss of me. Go to hell. Whether she accepted his declaration or not, whether he accepted her declaration or not, she remained bobbing in the air without advancing or retreating. Jack struggled to pull Kathy up and turned her body as he tried to drag her across the street before the bone god past the last few houses. Dylan ran up beside Jack on the other side of Kathy. He folded one of her arms. He folded one of her arms over his shoulder and said, "Come on, Jack. Let's go. Hurry." They half carried and half dragged Kathy across the street and up into their yard in awkward fits and bursts of motion. Both boys were huffing and puffing. But they kept going. Dylan, let me make this a new paragraph. Dylan let out a little squeak. Jack assumed his brother had spotted the fairy watching them, because Dylan then held up his bad middle finger at her as they approached the steps to their house. The bone god let out a low, deep growl. Then the thunder of his steps sped up. Jack afforded one short glance over his shoulder. Jack afforded one short glance over his shoulder as they started to negotiate the steps. The bone god kicked the back of the next door neighbor's car. Taillights shattered and the bent trunk popped open. That same foot tore through and uprooted the hedges between their yards. Its next step Its next step clipped their mailbox with a hollow pong noise. The pole shifted askew only a few inches. The pole shifted askew only a few inches. Let me make this a new paragraph because we're going to lean into this mailbox thing a little bit. Make it more about the dad. Its next step clipped the mailbox with a hollow pong noise. The pole shifted askew only a few inches, and the mailbox itself stayed firmly on its perch. Their dad did not mess around when he put something up. He built things to last. The bone god actually tripped and scraped its knees over the drive in two long, chalky lines. It leaned forward, reaching for the brothers and Kathy. I can't remember his name. Jack. Jack skinned the top of his big toe as he almost missed the top step. Jack skinned the top of his big toe as he almost missed the top step. Unlike the bone god, he kept his footing. And the brothers heaved through the open door with Kathy. They dropped her a little too hard in the foyer, and she let out a groan. At least she was still alive. Alright, let me say what I have so far. They both dove for the door and slammed it shut as the giant bony fingers reached for it. They fought the locks, and then the door bounced in its frame with a heavy impact. Both boys staggered away from it. Jack accidentally stepped on the side of Kathy's ankle. Both boys staggered away from it. Jack accidentally stepped on the side of Kathy's ankle. He apologized, but she only gave a slight whimper in response. There was another strike on the door. The wall to the right cracked, but the door held. What do we do? Jack whispered. Hold on, let me do one more thing here. Dad snorted on the end of a snore from upstairs and mumbled something. What do we do? Jack whispered. I don't know. Dylan took another step back. The silence extended. The door exploded open as pieces of the hardware flew past the boys' heads. The fairy with her pink hair standing up all around, her wings buzzing in a blur, her bug eyes glaring, and her hands and her fingers curled into claws flew back into the house with them. Dylan whispered out another curse word. It was one of the bad ones. A bony hand, too big for the opening. A bony hand, too big for the opening, reached through and locked onto the fairy's wings. A bony hand too big for the opening reached through and locked on the fairy's wings, silencing them. The bone god jerked the fairy backward into the yard. After he released her, she spoke words in a high voice that would have been ridiculously funny under other circumstances. The words were none that the boys understood. bone god growled and backhanded the fairy, sending her tumbling into the street. He turned to the boys, turned to the open door, turned to the boys, and lowered one dark, empty socket to the door. The brothers backed up to the wall, leaving Kathy exposed on the floor. The bone god nodded its great skull and moved out of the opening. The ground thundered. The ground thundered as it paced away, ducked under a power line, and continued collecting bodies up the street. This included the twisted form of Kathy's father and what looked like her mother, cast aside on their porch across the street. The fairy rose up. She faltered on her bent wings, but then approached the house in the air again. Jack wanted to run up and close the door, but he could see the lock was busted. Lock was already busted. She paused in the doorway, glaring at the boys. Then she nodded, reached in, and pulled the broken door 2 in its frame. The off-toned buzz of her wings retreated. The off-toned buzz of her wings retreated, and the thunderous steps of the bone god moved on. Dad snorted again. He mumbled something. Mom mumbled something back, and the snoring continued. The snoring resumed. The sound of sirens rose in the distance. Okay, let me fix this right here real quick. We're in the final steps here, I believe. The sound of sirens rose in the distance and drew closer. The boys stood listening. As Kathy drew noisy air through a nose that Jack could now see was bent. What do we do, Dylan? I don't know, man. I'd say we never leave our teeth under the pillow again. I don't know, man. I'd say we never leave our teeth under the pillow again. But that may have been what saved us and protected our house. I have no idea. No, Dylan. I mean, about this. About Kathy. About her parents. Okay, I'm not sure if there's question marks go there, but I'm going to use them anyway. No, Dylan, I mean about this, about Kathy, about her parents, the whole neighborhood. When the police get here, I don't even know if this is the name, Mr. Fazer was a cop. They'll want to know what happened to him. Kathy will want to know when she wakes up. And what am I supposed to do with that coin? Dylan just shook his head. As tears welled in his eyes. I wish we hadn't stayed up. Jack sighed and said, I think we need to wake up Dad. Dylan shook his head and a couple tears broke loose to run down his cheeks. He's going to be so mad, Jack. And that's before we try to tell him about the monsters. Jack nodded and started up the stairs. I'll do it. You stay here with Kathy. The whole way up, listening to his father's growling snore. Jack thought about the Tooth Fairy's coin. Bones on one side, the face of the bone god on the other, letters in some unknown language. Letters in some unknown language spelled out in teeth. Why were they spared? And would she come back? Knowing the truth about the Tooth Fairy changed everything in Jack's life.